297 antiquities and idols stolen and smuggled into US are set to come back to India. These treasures, some dating back to 4,000 years, were stolen out of India and are part of the deal signed between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now these and other such artifacts form a part of a historical material and core of a civilization. There are also series of stolen properties that are being returned to India from different parts of the world. Right through the British Raj, for over 200 years, India was plundered, looted, and stripped of its riches and heritage. Today, these treasures are lying in different museums and in private collections across UK and are still funding the British. Like the gem-studded enamel sword of Tipu Sultan that was sold for over £101,000 in an auction in UK. And then there is the Kohinoor, the Nasak diamond, Siraj-ud-Daura's palanquin, Shivaji's Bagnak or tiger claws, all across UK museums for which the Indians have to pay the British government to see them. After the partition, this loot has continued from the temples, private collections, and even private homes. The Indian government is working to get back some of these treasures that are part of history and culture. In fact, Australia, Singapore, USA, Germany have returned some of the idols and sculptures. We spoke to Sanjeev Sanyal, who is a historian and principal economic advisor, on getting back India's looted treasures and organized theft of country's heritage that is happening even now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, for talking to us. There's a lot of conversation happening about the Kohinoor diamond and all the artifacts that were stolen from India pre-independence. But I don't see any conversation happening about post-independence, the loot and the steal and the smuggling that's still going on. Prime Minister Modi also has, talked about this, and he talked about artifacts, bringing them back, and also stopping illegal smuggling. We start off by asking you, what are your thoughts on this?
We need to separate two sets of looting. One is the colonial era looting, that is, will include the Kohinoor most famously, and there is a conversation to be had about that. And worldwide, this conversation is happening. For example, the French are now returning the Benin bronzes and various other colonial era loot. But there is another issue, which is a live issue as well, and I think not enough attention is given to it, is that even after independence, there has been continuous looting of artifacts from India, and it is continuing even today. So, as a rough estimate, since 1980, somewhere between 20,000 and 25,000 Indian artifacts have been stolen, okay? Particularly in the decades of the 80s and 90s. And they probably worth, upwards of $10–12 billion. And so they are scattered around the world in museums, private collections. They come up for auction in famous auction houses around the world, in London and so on, and New York. And this is a real problem because, first of all, it means that there's continued desecration of our cultural sites. Secondly, there is already in place a series of conventions that exist. See, the colonial era stuff is more complicated legally, but the post-colonial era loot, there already exists well-established conventions for bringing them back. So I'll give you some examples. There is a Hague Convention of 1954. There is a UN Convention in 1970. Another one from 1995. In 2021, the G20 in the Rome Declaration included that cultural restitution is a major thing. So there is already a well-established system of doing it. This is no longer a matter of debate. At least the colonial stuff is a matter of debate, and we should get into that. But this is an issue where we need to pay attention as well.
Okay, so when we see some of the things when we travel abroad and you see them, all the artifacts that are popping, they're not really small artifacts. You have huge statues and they're cannons. How are they being smuggled out so easily?
So it's a long, complicated conversation on this, but there is a complex. These are large and powerful criminal networks. It involves, in certain cases, even terrorist organizations like ISIS, for example, were doing this in Syria and Iraq. So these are well-established nodes. This is not some India-centric thing. There are well-established systems in which, by the way, officials in various countries are involved in it, including Indian officials. There are customs, there are auction houses, there are well-known art experts who are happy to provide provenance for them. So that is a fairly well-oiled machine that you are dealing with. Now, there was one famous case, of course, of Subhash Kapoor, well-known art sort of connoisseur, collector, auctioneer, whatever you may want to collect, operating out of New York. And he was, of course, procuring all these artifacts from India. Note that this is not some local villager does not know the value of something and sells it to a tourist kind of thing. These are well-oiled machines which are targeting specific artifacts, and they are willing, they are capable and willing to use violence if necessary to procure them. And this is about fairly large amounts of money. So what I'm trying to get through to you is that don't think of this as some amateur operation where people, some small scale guy is doing it. This is not the case. Many of the places from which these things are stolen are protected sites under ASI as well. So there is all kinds of things going on. So this is something that needs to be taken seriously, and a big pushback needs to be done.
So, I was reading, so we have the illegal trade of antiques despite Antiquities and Art Treasure Act of 1972 for protection and preservation. But this has not stopped the looting. I mean, what does the law enforcement need to do to stop? Look, India is huge, we all know, and it's one of the oldest civilization, and we've had, series of kings, and each one of them has, the art and crafts have flourished. So how do you protect that huge monument?
So first of all, we need to be serious about this issue. Between 2000 and 2012, 0 artifacts were brought back from the rest of the world, despite the fact that there was a large amount of looting going on prior to that and even during that period. There was just no seriousness. And in some cases, you had, for example, the US Customs, etc., who had actually apprehended some of these artifacts, but literally very little interest on the Indian side to actually to go and take them back. It's only been since around about 2015 that we are seeing systematically hundreds of artifacts being brought back. I don't know if you've been watching this. Hundreds of artifacts are being brought back. Even there, it's only relatively recently that this machine, the process, has become relatively smoother, and they are being brought back, as you may see. My friend Vijay Kumar, he's actually a shipping expert, but he is I wouldn't call him anymore an amateur, but because he is quite the pro at this, has been working and trying to hunt down individual items from museums around the world, whether it's in Australia or the UK or the US, from private collections, from auctions. And then, of course, there is the very complicated task of matching them to photographs of the originals from wherever they used to be. It's a very meticulous, painful work, by the way. But this is being done by this, as I said, amateur network being run by Vijay Kumar, and I have had the fortune of working with him over the last decade plus, and we together managed to bring quite a few pieces back. Of course, he is, I would say, in this space, quite a legend, as you may be aware.
I just wanted to understand a little bit about the process a little bit more, because some of these artifacts are in personal collections, and then you need to verify them, and you
Absolutely.
need to figure out that they're genuine enough to then start asking for take the next step. So can you just take us through a little bit?
So what happens is that, let's say a item has been, 2 ways it can work. Either you know that something has been stolen, and let's say that it was reported, there was an FIR or whatever. Sometimes, a lot of times there isn't one, but let's say in this particular case there's a particularly important piece that was stolen, there is record of it. So one thing is to either go around hunting through catalogs and other things around the world and do searches to see if you can find that, and alternatively you find something that's come up for auction and you do it in reverse. So you then look through records, say for example in Pondicherry, The French Institute or the Oriental Institute there has a large collection of photographs. There are other museums or archaeological survey, etc. which have. So then what you do is use these photographs or descriptions and other things that you may have. Some may be textual descriptions as well. And then and especially if they are dated photographs, that's great, because then you can prove that they were stolen post a certain date. Yeah, otherwise people say, oh, it was stolen in 1783 by so and so, by Tipu Sultan, gifted it or something. So to avoid that conversation, you say that, look, since 1970 there is a convention. Anything taken after that 1970 convention has to be returned by law. So there is no. So then what you have to do, if you can then state, okay, this was taken after this date, or can you provide papers to show that it was outside the country already before 1970? Then you can mess around, do all kinds of things, and then after iteration you can show that this particular piece has a small imperfection here, because remember these are handmade things, so there are small imperfections that are too much coincidence that these 3 or 4 imperfections in this statue are exactly the ones in the other ones, because you can always make 2 things which are similar and claim that no, this is not that one, but the imperfections are the same, they match on. It's like facial recognition, right? There are the exact proportions and small what should I say, inconsistencies allow your face to be unique to you. So similarly, that is also true of statues in particular, paintings and other such things.
And then where does the government, because they come back to the government of India?
Yes, typically what happens is, there are many processes. One process that that is followed, that this as I said, Vijay's network, what they do is then they brings up this issue to let's say there is an auction that's happening, say, in London, and he has been able to show that, look, this statue that's coming up for auction was stolen from so and so place, here is a photograph, etc. And of course then the MEA gets in the act. Let's say if it's in London, then presumably our High Commission there, or if it's in New York, our consulate there, whatever is the case. And then also simultaneously there are supporters, network support group of people in these countries as well, who sometimes inside, say in the US, the DA's office has been very helpful, the customs has been very helpful, and so on. And so then the identified item is stopped from being auctioned. So once that has happened, then what happens is that you then have to come back in India, talk to ASI, talk to our customs, so that when it comes back in, there is no. And so then there is a process that is in place. I was involved in, for example, identifying the Nalanda Buddha about 3-4 years ago. So it was owned by somebody in the UK and was being auctioned in the Netherlands, or the other way around. So we had to go and stop that. Then there was an old Director General of the Indian Museum in Kolkata, who then gave me, arranged to get me a photograph of that from a period which was clearly after 1970. So we could show that this is the stolen Nalanda piece. And then there were a series of iterations, and then it was brought back here. If I remember right, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman went and personally took custody of it from when it was brought back and presented to our customs. And so there are things, but there may be other situations where other processes are followed. Yeah.
So, we were talking about other countries returning, and we've seen USA sent back 307 in 2022, and then 157, and then 200 in 2016. UNESCO has the Intergovernment Committee for Promoting and Return of Cultural Property. Why is this not helping? Because when something comes up for auction, don't they check the ownership, where it's come from? And it's very obviously, it looks very Indian. I mean, Indian does stand out.
The fact that it is Indian means nothing.
Oh, okay. It shouldn't.
So first of all, there's lots of replicas being made. We are exporting handicrafts of all kinds. We can't suddenly stop some statue that has been made. Right. So the point is, it's a very specialized activity to recognize that something is an actual antiquity.
Yes.
Otherwise, what will happen is that somebody makes a statue of a Nataraj and wants to export it for a new temple built in New Jersey, and you'll ban it.
No, but I mean,
so therefore,
sorry.
there is a certain amount of expertise needed to identify
Yeah.
these things and to do it.
Yeah.
So the problem is that the average customs person cannot be expected to have this. This is a highly specialized job.
No, but
so
the
there has to be,
auction house would have, that's why they would
so
value
the
it.
unfortunate part is that the auction houses themselves have no particular interest in doing this. They want to auction because they get a cut from the auction.
Okay.
So in fact, that is one of the issues, that the auction houses and the private market that exists is not interested in helping out at all. It is the government agencies, including the government agencies, and this network of amateur enthusiasts, that has been the driving force of trying to cut back on this. The unfortunate part is that well-known auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's, etc., have typically not been especially helpful. I mean, of course, when pressure is there, the government is paying attention, they will stall a auction. But so far, our experience is that on their own, they are not going to work very hard towards this. Of course, they are supposed to look into the provenance, but be very clear that lots of fake provenance has been created. It's not very difficult to create fake paperwork to show that this is something that was already outside India in the year 1905 or whatever it is they happen to have shown.
So you specifically in this present government, they're very clear about wanting to get back as much as we. So have you all started making a list? What is the process that's happening to?
No, so what we have done is obviously we have gained a lot of experience from doing this now, much better than we used to be. So the process is accelerating, as you may have seen. The fact that we are now also cracking down on these things meant that these international mafia are far more careful about what they attack. Otherwise, there was a phase when they were just almost picking up whatever they wanted. So there is some effort. The state of Tamil Nadu has an idol wing, as you may know. But there is there are countries like Italy, for example, which has an antiquities police. There is also Cambodia, for example, that has become quite good at being able to push for restitution. So there is a lot of work that is going on. It's not like things have not happened. Do remember that, as I said, barely a decade ago, we used to get nothing back. Now we're getting them in hundreds. Now one can argue that it should go into thousands. But there has to be a process for this. There have to be specialists involved who do this because you can't ask the average policeman to be able to distinguish between a modern bronze Nataraj and a Chola bronze Nataraj. How can you expect that person? So it has to be a relatively specialized activity. There has to be intelligence around this. And to be fair, governments have become much more helpful in this. Whether it's the US or the Australian government has been helpful. Museums have become much more. Earlier, just as recently as a decade ago, they would simply refuse. Whereas now they are much more apologetic at the very least, and while some are more helpful than others, I think this brazen attitude has at least stopped.
So within our country, when we're getting them back, what are we doing? Because when we travel abroad, the museums over there are very alive. There's a lot of...
So there are two things to be remembered. They are being brought back. Some of them, by the way, are on display in the Purana Killa in Delhi. But there are lots of these pieces. My own view is that in the case that these were idols that were being worshipped, they should be sent back to the place of origin. Because these are idols, they are sacred objects, they are not meant for gawking by tourists. They are sacred objects. In some cases, when they have been taken back to their place of origin, you should see the video of how the gods are welcomed back into the original temples. I mean, it's extraordinary how it brings alive the local community. So I am a big votary of sending back many of these pieces to their place of origin. After all, when something is stolen from you and it is recovered, it is returned to you. We don't say, oh, sorry, we will now going to display it in the police station. So the same principle must apply and we should return it. Now, where it is not known where it came from, and there's so much of it coming back, yes, then display it should be respectfully displayed in some museum or the other. Again, sending it back to ASI go downs is a pointless existence.
I agree. There's also a talk about a lot of things that has gone before the independence. We had the Kohinoor diamond,
Yes.
we have the Peacock throne, we have the the Nasik blue diamond, which is now with the private collector. Now, like I said, the conversations are happening. Is something happening on that front too?
So this is a more complicated conversation because it will immediately lead to who is the, at which point do you do a cutoff? I mean, by the way, this will be not just true of India. We were colonized at a certain point in history. How far back do you want to go into this? And if take for example Europe, they were fighting wars with each other. Many things were taken from various other people to other people, and so on. So, something happened in the 8th century. Is that the cutoff? And so on. So, this is a somewhat more complicated debate. It's a useful debate to have. I'm not saying the debate should not happen, but it's a debate where I think it requires a somewhat different angle of attack than the one that I was describing earlier for the more recent artifacts.
Because these were taken by the British, and country of origin is India.
Yes. So for example, they were taken, but you see the point here is that let's say the Kohinoor diamond. Pakistan could also very well claim it. After all, it was taken from the Ranjit Singh's descendants, and they'll say Lahore was the capital. So those questions tend to be far more complicated. I'm not saying you shouldn't have those conversations. I'm just pointing out to you that that is a different set of conversations from the ones that I'm personally dealing with right now.
Okay, another point that takes us to another point is you're talking about, we've talked about the stolen artifacts and the way to get them back, but you also need to protect and preserve what we have, across the length and breadth. ASI, do you think, is up to it? Because there's also I was reading about it. There's hardly law doesn't seem to be enough, and they're not convincing. They don't know what is to be preserved.
So I think one can debate the laws all one wishes. I think while there are problems with AMSAR and other laws relating to antiquities, a lot of it relates to actually the way we are applying them and using them. I very recently wrote a working paper, a full report, and then also a bunch of articles in newspapers, etc., basically talking about nationally protected monuments. So let's talk about nationally protected monuments. India has about roughly 3,700 odd nationally protected monuments. Now the problem is most of that list is essentially what we inherited from the British, a bunch of sites that we inherited from the princely states, and then a handful of them that were added subsequently. There has been no rationalization of this list since independence, really. Okay, very little, if any. So the net result of it is the list of nationally protected monuments. This is not the full list of protected monuments, because there are state protected monuments, locally protected monuments, privately held monuments. So that's not what I'm talking about. These are nationally protected monuments. So this 3,700. Now you go and look at that list. First of all, there are dozens that are completely missing. So we do not even know where they are. Then there are dozens of, if not hundreds of monuments that are difficult to justify as nationally protectable or should be protected. I mean, there are dozens of graves, for example, of obscure British officials. Some PWD engineer died in some village. His grave is there. It's the size of this room, a brick structure. There's literally no reason it should be a nationally protected monument. I mean, I have nothing against that PWD engineer. I mean, his family wants to look after that plot, that's fine. But to call it a nationally protected monument means that there is an amount of energy and effort that ASI or the government in general has to put to protect it. Then AMSAR Act has all kinds of regulations about it, that up to 300 meters from that site, development work is curtailed. Now I understand that you may want to have those regulations for protecting the Taj Mahal, perfectly fine. But why some obscure grave of an unknown PWD engineer? Or there's something called a Kos Minar. These were basically milestones from the late Mughal period. Now, I have nothing against preserving them. They are quite, I mean, they're nothing great architecturally, but okay, there's a case for preserving a bunch of them. But making them a nationally protected monument is totally a different thing. It's basically a brick pillar. And I think for historical reasons, they should be preserved. But why should they be nationally protected? The state can quite easily protect it, because the moment you make Coast Minar a nationally protected monument, let me show you what happens. By its very definition, it's along highways. So now 300 meters on either side you cannot develop. Even expanding the highway becomes a complicated thing. So, why are we putting ourselves into all of this? What we need is a properly rationalized list, which first of all takes into account of the existing list, the ones that we genuinely want to protect. The ones that are not nationally important should be given to the state, and they should protect it in their whatever is the sensible. Then there are many sites that are of national importance. There are many important forts of Shivaji, for example, in Maharashtra. Many of them are falling apart. They are beautiful sites, by the way, in their own right. Irrespective of what you think of their historical value, they are unbelievable architecturally and the scenic beauty, etc., because they are on a mountain and very interesting. They need to be protected. Now, we need to either bring them into the nationally protected list and protect them, or the state government has to protect them. Somewhere they need to be protected. Some cases there are, like in temples, etc., there may be a private trust that protects it. But we need to get serious about this whole thing.
Are you saying we don't have a list of what constitutes a national?
First of all, it is rather vague. Anything above the age of 100 can be actually constitute a nationally protected monument if you want to make it so. Now, that's loose thing, but for example, in theory, there are lots of houses that were built 100 years ago. Do we need to protect all of them? No. So, we need to have a sensible way of thinking about it. A brick structure, identical brick structure, one of them built 100 years ago or one built 5,000 years ago, clearly it's not about being the brick structure.
Yeah.
Right, that 5,000-year-old structure is a Harappan site, blah, blah, blah. It has a certain value, which cannot be equated just by virtue of looking at, defining it in some hard way. So, we need to have at the very least, a simple system of being able to identify what is meaningful. By the way, very often these things have to be done administratively. Putting it in law is impossible, because there are many soft reasons why something may be important. But what we need to do is to continuously iterate and have a reasonable national conversation about what is worth protecting, and protect it properly.
Yeah. So, one major element and factor in all of this, including protection and also stopping, are the people, around, if the people who stay around these places. What about this whole, are you looking at a whole policy thing, or where you're going to sort of educate the people or tell them if they see something happening, do this, or is anything being planned?
It depends on various contexts, various things happen. One of the reasons many of these things have survived is because of the people in that area. So, be very clear that very often in our general media conversation, there is a vague tone that, the locals are bad because they are destroying this. I am sorry, the only reason those monuments exist is because the locals have in some form protected them. Two, when we are going about protecting them, yes, they may need some education, etc. We need to take into account the local context, and I will give you another one. As a part of our list of nationally protected monuments, there are a large number of small antiquities. For example, it may be a statue, a cannon or something. Now, it may be a cannon in the middle of a field. Now, because it's now, first of all, why is an antiquity, an artifact, considered a monument? You can easily move a cannon around, put it in the museum. Instead, we are leaving it out in the elements, rusting, but meanwhile that 300-meter rule is being applied. The poor chap cannot cultivate his field. Now, you have created a conflict where there was none. That same chap looked after the cannon on his field because it was an artifact. Now, you have created a problem for him because he looked after it, or his forefathers looked after it all this while. Now, he can't build a house, do anything. Now, you got to have a certain sense of reasonableness about how you manage antiquities and artifacts.
So, my last question therefore is that since you've personally are involved and are very passionate about bringing this back, and what are the problems that we're facing, and you're in the government, what can we look ahead to see how to sort of actively sort of educate people? Also, what do we see coming back to India? Are there any laws, principles coming in? What is the government likely to do, and what are you pushing for?
So, as you may have seen that in the last decade or so, there has been some work both in terms of bringing all these antiquities back. As I said, there's a lot of support for this. Our foreign missions have become much more sensitized to this. In the very early stage, they used to be actually quite resistant to the whole thing. Similar thing is happening with the ASI. The process of doing this, it's becoming much more routinized, and of course, the fact that the Prime Minister personally takes interest in the matter has also helped the conversation. So, I think on the restitution front, we are doing the right thing. We now need to scale it up. So, that's a scaling up problem. In the case of the nationally protected monuments, that requires us to rethink our approach completely. And the first step of that is to do a survey of the issue and publish a report of some sort, which is what I've just done a couple of months ago, widely appreciated in the community who are interested in this space, and it was submitted, of course, to both the Prime Minister and the Culture Ministry. And so now the next steps have to be taken.
And you hope to upgrade the ASI ministry, because we see a lot of problem coming, starting with the ASI, because sometimes you
see the ASI also needs to be given more resources and other things. And in the report also I have written that ASI is given a budget of 400 odd crores, 420 crores or some amount like that. Now you cannot expect it to be looking after 3,700 monuments on that budget. I mean, even there, out of that budget, a large monument like Red Fort or Taj Mahal or something will eat up a large part of that. So now there are actually monuments on which 1 lakh is spent a year. Now how do you expect the ASI to look after it on that budget?
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.